Good
Welcome and
afternoon.
thank you for standing by. At this time, all attendees are in a listen-only mode. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Michael Hawes. Michael, you may begin.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this U.S. Census Bureau webinar, where we're going to be taking a look at the 2010 Demonstration Data Product Suite for the Redistricting and Demographic and Housing Characteristics file production settings that was just released on April 3rd of 2023. My name is Michael Hawes. I am a senior advisor and senior statistician in the Census Bureau's Research and Methodology Directorate, and I'm joined by my colleague Matthew Spence, who's a senior advisor in our Demographic Directorate in the Population Division. Before we begin, I just want to quickly state that any viewpoints or opinions expressed today are entirely the presenter's own and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints or opinions of the U.S. Census Bureau. I also want to make a note that when you exit this webinar today, you're going to be presented with a very short survey, a 4-question poll. We hope you will take a moment to fill that out and let us know whether you got the information you wanted from this webinar and how we can improve in the future. So, all right, diving in. What are we going to cover today? Well, we'll give you a brief background on the confidentiality protections for the 2020 census data products. And we'll give you an overview of the new Demonstration Data Product Suite. As I said, the full title for this is the 2010 Demonstration Data Product Suite Redistricting and Demographic and Housing Characteristics File Production Settings 2023-04-03. It's a very long title, and so to avoid taking time saying that over and over again, you'll see that abbreviated throughout this presentation as the 2010 DDPS. We'll also discuss how you can understand the fitness for use of these data and the anticipated fitness for use of the 2020 DHC data product that will be coming out in May. We'll also look at understanding the confidentiality protections of this new disclosure avoidance system at these production settings. We'll provide you a glimpse of some resources that we've released for data users to use. And then we'll give a little look ahead at what you should expect over the coming weeks and months. So a little bit of background on confidentiality for the 2020 census data products. The U.S. Census Bureau is prohibited under Title 13, Sections 8B and 9A from releasing or publishing any data or data products that would re-identify or that could permit the re-identification of any of our respondents. So in order to safeguard the public's confidential census responses, the Census Bureau has long employed a whole family of statistical techniques that can be used to mitigate disclosure risk in our published data. We call these statistical techniques disclosure avoidance for short. Now, in the past, we've used different kinds of disclosure avoidance techniques to protect confidentiality in the census. For example, for the 1970-1980 censuses, we used suppression, which involved either redacting or suppressing entire data tables if there weren't enough individuals or households reflected in them, or suppressing individual cells within those tables if they didn't reflect enough of an underlying population. By 1990, and for the 1990, 2000, and 2010 censuses, we shifted to a different approach to disclosure avoidance, which involved infusing noise into the census statistics in order to allow us to publish more data. And we did that through a process called swapping, where we would swap entire households' records with those records of households in a nearby geography. Now, disclosure risk is not static. The threats that we have to protect against are constantly increasing. Now, we know that any publication of data, any release of statistics is going to carry some risk of disclosure. You can't avoid that. But unfortunately, improvements in computing power and the growing proliferation of rich third-party data sources that could be used in a confidentiality attack on the census are constantly increasing. And that means that disclosure risk is increasing substantially as well. So in order to protect confidentiality in the census, in order to meet our legal and ethical obligations to our respondents, we have to adapt and respond to these increasing threats. Now, to understand kind of what we're protecting against, it's helpful to understand how re-identification attacks work, particularly those that begin with aggregate tabular data like the census. So an attacker would take like the published aggregate tables and run them through a sophisticated series of system of equations. And then from those tables, they are able to reconstruct individual level records that were used to produce those tables. Now, those reconstructed records don't contain names or other direct identifiers for the individuals that are reflected there, but they contain enough details, demographic details like age, sex, and so on, that you could use in combination with the individual's location to link those reconstructed records to some third-party data source, like, for example, commercially available data that does have names on them. And in doing so, you can reattach names to those records, and you've re-identified specific individuals in the supposedly confidential published data. Now, in order to understand kind of the threat that we were facing, the Census Bureau conducted our own simulated re-identification attack on the 2010 census, where we took a small subset of the published 2010 census data tables, reconstructed the underlying data from them, and then linked those data to commercially available data from the 2010 time period. And what we found was that we were actually able to reconstruct those records with a high degree of accuracy. On this slide, you can see the agreement rates for the reconstructed microdata, essentially the percentage of those reconstructed individual level records that agreed exactly with records in the confidential census edited file, or CEF. Essentially, records that agreed on the individual's location to the block, their sex, their age, their race, or their ethnicity. So about 46% of all of those agreed on exact age, so exact single year of age. But the subset of tables that we used in our simulated attack didn't always provide for a perfectly precise age reconstruction. So we also tested this kind of with a little bit of fuzziness on age, where we would allow matches for exact age for individuals 0 through 21 years of age, and then bins of age for everyone over 21. And what we found there was actually we were able to get an agreement rate between the reconstructed data and the confidential CEF data of about 92%, which was alarmingly high. Now, delving a little deeper, you can see when you kind of break those agreements between the reconstructed data to the confidential microdata from the census, that we got different agreement rates depending on the block size. Blocks with populations of 1 through 9 had lower agreement rates, largely because that's where the swapping protections from 2010 had been concentrated. But even for blocks that were relatively small, like 10 people through 49 people, we were still getting very large agreement rates. So there was clearly confidential information kind of leaking through the swapping mechanism that we used in 2010. Then when we look at kind of re-identifying those individuals, kind of linking them to commercially available data from the time period, we had kind of two options. We used a set of commercially available data, but they were kind of moderate quality data. There were better commercial data available in 2010, and commercially available data get better with each passing year. So in addition to kind of running this re-identification study against the commercial data that we had, we also ran it against the CEF itself, essentially linking on those reconstructed records to the confidential data to see, well, what could an attacker with higher quality external data, how well could they do in a re-identification attack? And so comparing to the CEF gives us kind of a worst case upper bound on re-identification risk for this type of attack. And you can see we got about 60% matches to the commercial data, 97% matches to the CEF. Now, how many of those were correct? Well, the confirmation rate tells you what percentage of those were actually linking to the correct person, 25% against the commercial data, almost 76% against the CEF. And that last column, precision, essentially tells you the attacker's confidence. It's like what percentage of confirmed re-identifications out of the total population of possible re-identifications there are. So the 41% and the 78% that you see there are essentially the attacker's confidence that they got the re-identification correct. So again, like 78% confidence on a re-identification is pretty alarming, because it means that the attacker's right three times out of 4. Now, one thing that practitioners of disclosure avoidance are typically particularly concerned about are what we call population uniques. Those are individuals who have unique combinations of characteristics within their geographies. So we wanted to see like, okay, how accurate were these re-identifications for population uniques in those reconstructed data? And as you can see here in those far right columns, we were getting precision rates. Again, that's the attacker's confidence of 94.6% and 93.6% respectively for the commercial data and the Ceph. So these are very high confidence that if an attacker finds a match, that they can be confident that they've correctly re-identified the individual. And then kind of delving a little bit deeper into population uniques, we're kind of looking on this slide at population uniques who are of a different race than the modal or most common race within their block. And again, you see very high rates of precision here, 89% and 82% against the commercial data and the Ceph. So the re-identification statistics that we were seeing in this simulated attack were very alarming. And they prompted the Census Bureau to modernize our approach to disclosure avoidance for the 2020 census because we realized that the methods we'd been using up through 2010 were just no longer sufficient to meet this new kind of attack, this reconstruction embedded re-identification attack. So for the 2020 census, we're improving on the noise injection methods that we used for the past 3 decades by employing a mathematical accounting framework known as differential privacy in order to inform the noise injection that we're using for the census. In any statistic that you publish, every individual that's reflected in that statistic contributes to that statistic's value. And every statistic that you publish is going to leak a tiny bit of confidential information. So differential privacy as this accounting framework allows you to assess each individual's potential contribution to the statistic that you're publishing. And by assessing and measuring that contribution, you're able to, through noise injection, limit how much information about that individual will leak in the published statistic. Now, the 2020 Census Disclosure Avoidance System incorporates a number of different components. There's no single way to implement a differential privacy framework. It's merely the accounting system that you use to measure and track disclosure avoidance across all of your releases. So for the 2020 census, we've employed a variety of differentially private algorithms to protect the data products that comprise the kind of totality of the 2020 census. For today's discussion, we're going to focus mostly on what's known as the top-down algorithm, or TDA. That's the algorithm that we're using to protect the redistricting data that were published back in August and September of 2021, that are used to protect the demographic profile and demographic and housing characteristics file data that are coming out next month, and that will also be used to protect the congressional district summary files that will be coming out later. We do have other algorithms that we're using for the kind of subsequent 2020 census data products, including the detailed DHCA, detailed DHCB, and supplemental DHC. We're not going to talk too much about those today, but we're happy to answer questions. So how does the top-down algorithm work? Kind of knowing how the TDA works will help data users understand kind of what the implications of this noise infusion are going to be for their uses of census data. Well, at its most basic, the top-down algorithm takes as its input the confidential microdata from the census. That's the census edited file, the Ceph, and our geographic reference file, which gives us all the precise geographies of the US. And then it converts those individual level records into a histogram that the computer can better process. Now, histogram in this context is really, it's a functional equivalent to the microdata. It's just a transformation of the microdata into kind of a tabular representation of those characteristics. So it provides essentially a count of records for each possible combination of all of the variables and all of the attributes that are reflected in the microdata. So once we've converted the data to the histogram, we then ask a series of questions or queries of those data, different counting questions, and we inject a small amount of differentially private noise to the results of each of those queries. And we call those results the noisy measurements, and we're going to talk more about noisy measurements in a moment. Now, these noisy measurements are all independently drawn. They're all independently taken, and so they're not going to be consistent with each other. Number of males in a geography and number of females in a geography may not sum to the total number of people because you're adding noise independently to those two numbers. So in order to ensure consistency within the redistricting data and the DHC, the top-down algorithm then post-processes those data to ensure internal and hierarchical consistency across categories, across geographies, and so on. Once that post-processing has been accomplished, then we convert the resulting internally consistent histogram back into microdata. And that microdata then feeds into the decennial census tabulation system to create the tables that you know. If you want to learn more about the top-down algorithm, there's a great technical paper linked here, and the slides will be available later, so you can use all the links. Now, as the name suggests, the top-down algorithm works from the top down. It works along what's called the geographic hierarchy, beginning at the level of the total United States, and then progressing down each geographic level, post-processing each geographic level in turn. At each level, the algorithm takes that full suite of noisy measurements for that level of the hierarchy, along with a set of invariants and constraints. Invariants are those data points to which we don't add any noise. So for the 2020 census, that includes things like the total state population count, as well as the total number of housing units and the total number of occupied major group quarters facilities at the block level. And then it takes all of those and uses those noisy measurements, invariants, and constraints to post-process the data into an internally consistent histogram. Then once it's done at that first geographic level, it moves down one, and the results from the higher level then add to the set of constraints. So each geographic level will sum to the parent level or levels above it. Now, the geographic hierarchy or spine is important to understand because this is part of how we were able to optimize and tune the top-down algorithm to improve accuracy for certain important types of geographies. Now, the standard tabulation hierarchy that we use at the Census Bureau for our publications goes US to state to county to tract to block root to block. But those are not necessarily the geographies that most data users are interested in. So for the redistricting data, we made a series of optimizations to the geographic spine to bring other kind of important geographies closer to the hierarchy such that we could improve accuracy for those geographies. That included branching out American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian areas into their own branch of the spine, and then optimizing block groups within the spine in order to improve accuracy for geographies like minor civil divisions, places, and individual AIN-NH areas. For the demographic and housing characteristics file, we further modified this hierarchy to incorporate what are known as population estimates primitive geographies. These population estimates primitive geographies are the most granular geographic areas that are required in order to derive tables for all of the geographies for which official population estimates are produced. These primitive geographies form a complete mutually exclusive map of the US. And then below them, we have tract subsets and tract subset groups that are essentially the intersection of those primitive geographies with our traditional tabulation tracts and tract groups. For the DHC production runs, the top-down algorithm's geographic hierarchy was modified to include these population estimates primitive geographies, tract subset groups, and tract subsets into the hierarchy, again, to improve accuracy. All right, so there's a number of kind of interim steps in running the top-down algorithm that produce files at different stages. As I mentioned before, everything starts with the census edited file. That's the confidential microdata, the CEF, from which we convert it into histogram, and then we take those queries that I mentioned, the counting questions off of the CEF, and we add noise to the results of those queries. Once that process is done, we are left with what are called noisy measurement files. And because we ran the redistricting data first and the DHC data later, we had a noisy measurement file for the redistricting data and a noisy measurement file for the DHC. As a refresher, these noisy measurement files are privacy protected tabulations that reflect all those queries we asked of the confidential data with the noise injected into them, but without enforced consistency. So the results can be negative, they can be inconsistent with each other, and so on. Then we post-process those data through those series of constraints and invariants that I mentioned before, and that leads to a privacy-protected microdata file, or PPMF. These are the internally consistent microdata that have resulted from that post-processing. Now, because the redistricting data and the DHC data were processed separately, the redistricting data then served as a further set of constraints for the post-processing of the DHC. So everything in the DHC PPMF is fully consistent with, and in fact contains all of the information that's included in the redistricting PPMF. So you can think of the DHC PPMF, that privacy protected microdata, as just an expansion of the redistricting PPMF. And then from there, those microdata files, the PPMFs, are tabulated and they produce the official data products that are released. Now, that brings us to our demonstration data product suite, the 2010 DDPS. So there are a number of components to the DDPS. There's an overview fact sheet that kind of lays out what the different components are and some important information about how the run was done, what the production settings were, etc. We have a set of detailed summary metrics, which my colleague Matthew Spence is going to go through in a few moments, that provide an extensive series of kind of accuracy measures that can allow data users to anticipate kind of what the anticipated fitness for use of the 2020 data are going to be. We are releasing the privacy protected microdata files for the production settings run of the 2010 census data. As well as tabulations of those, essentially reflecting what the 2020 tabulations will be. Those are being released via IPUMS, so thank you to IPUMS for tabulating those for us. We are releasing a set of kind of detailed information about the production settings that were used for these 2010 census data runs through the 2020 census algorithm. Those are the privacy loss budget allocations. New to this demonstration data product release is something called the noisy measurement file, which I mentioned before. This is the first time we've released noisy measurements to the public, and these provide an excellent opportunity to kind of delve a little bit deeper into how the top-down algorithm works and provide additional information about anticipated fitness for use of the data. Again, to kind of show you kind of graphically comparing to the prior diagram, the elements in green here are the components of the DDPS that we are releasing as part of this suite. The redistricting noisy measurement file. We will be releasing a DHC noisy measurement file in June of this year. The DHC privacy protected microdata file, or PPMF, which again incorporates all of the microdata from the redistricting PPMF. And then the published DHC tabulations that have been released via IPUMS. Now, the noisy measurement file is not something that many data users are kind of typically familiar with. It's a complete set of all of those noise-infused count queries for every query that the top-down algorithm took off of the Ceph. And it's for each geographic unit that exists on the algorithm's geographic hierarchy. Now, it's important to know that this is prior to the post-processing to enforce consistency. So the noisy measurements that are included in the noisy measurement file are all independent, so there's no enforced consistency between them. They include multiple measurements for the same related characteristics. So for example, on this particular screen, you can see we have queries and noisy measurements for Hispanic versus not Hispanic, and separate queries for Hispanic, not Hispanic by the 63 race categories. So those are not going to be consistent with each other, but they're all providing information about those characteristics. And as you can see, they also include some negative counts. Those are negative counts that provide information, useful information for understanding kind of how the algorithm's working, but they have then been post-processed in the data that are released to enforce consistency. So again, noisy measurement files are kind of slightly different animal than most data users are used to seeing, but they provide an excellent window into how the algorithm works and how the differential privacy has been applied. Now, I do want to stress the redistricting data that are included in this version of the 2010 demonstration data product suite is going to differ slightly from the production settings 2010 redistricting demonstration data product that we released in August of 2021. Now, why is that? Well, it's because every time you run data through a differentially private algorithm, you're going to get a different set of noise, a different set of random noise that are added or subtracted to each of those counts. This production settings run of the 2010 census is a completely fresh run from soup to nuts of all of the redistricting and DHC data. So it's still at the production settings. So the amount of privacy loss budget that's assigned to any particular query is exactly the same as was used in August of 2021, and it's exactly the same as have been used in the production runs for the 2020 data. But because it's a fresh run, it's going to have different random noise added to the individual queries. So the redistricting data will differ slightly from the production settings run that you may have looked at back in August of 2021. But I do want to stress that the 2020 census DHC that's going to be released next month in May will be fully consistent with the 2020 census redistricting data that was released in August and September of 2021. So just because you're seeing differences or inconsistencies between that August 2021 production settings 2010 demonstration data product and this one doesn't mean that you should expect any inconsistencies for the actual official 2020 products. All right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Matthew Spence, to give you a little glimpse into how you can use these data products to understand the fitness for use or the anticipated fitness for use of the 2020 census data. Matt, take it away.
Thank you so much, Michael. So I'm going to be talking about how do we understand these demonstration data as part of a picture of the fitness for use of the data more generally. We've released several disclosure avoidance demonstration products over the course of our time of preparing the disclosure avoidance system for our eventual release. And our argument is that the demonstration products show increasing accuracy, reduced amounts of noise, and increased fitness for use for a wide variety of use cases. So next slide, please. So one way, we've been producing detailed summary metrics now for every one of our 9 demonstration products to date. There are now 9 demonstration products that have applied differential privacy in the top-down algorithm, more specifically, to 2010 data, either a subset of data, only focusing on the redistricting data, or the full suite of data, like the last 3 releases, that we are planning to release for 2020. And we've released these 9 demonstration data products along with a suite of detailed summary metrics that take each run. So each one of those 9 demonstration products, it takes the microdata and the tabulations that come from those, and it directly compares those to tabulations from the published 2010 data. So these comparisons are, things like an absolute value of a difference. So, if, the disclosure avoidance experimental run or the demonstration run shows 1,000 and the published number is 1,001, well, the difference there is 1, and the absolute value of the difference, we take that so that we can just get a sense of how far off for each geography is there. So that count might be for a county, for example. And for each comparison, we average it across geographies in a particular geographic level. So for example, counties, to create estimates of accuracy. So things like the mean absolute error. So the mean absolute error for the county total population is where we line up every one of the 3,143 counties. We start with Ottawa County in Alabama, and we say, okay, what was the difference between this particular run or this particular demonstration product number and the published 2010 number? And that is for that county, the difference. And we look at all 3,143 differences, and we get an average of sort of how far off are those on average? How far off are these numbers when you're looking at the overall picture for counties for total population? So that will differ for characteristics. So total population will be one number, but the count of like the white alone population or the count of homeowners might be very different, even at the county level, the average mean absolute error. And we also look at measures of things like bias, and we count large outliers that might be notable for folks doing data research and things like that. We can use these metrics as one way to think about the fitness for use of the 2020 DHC products. So we've released a similar product, a production settings demonstration data and detailed summary metrics earlier for the redistricting data. And that was using the same software that we used to produce the 2020 redistricting data. We used that same software with the same settings on 2010 data so that we could see, and then the public can see, data users can see, just how far off does disclosure avoidance pull the the 2010 numbers. And you can imagine that in 2020, that number will be approximately the same. Next slide, please. So one thing I wanted to mention before I go into this slide is that the comparisons suffered two limitations. These are comparisons of geographies. So we're looking across each geography. Like I said, each county, we're taking the total population in the disclosure avoidance demonstration product. We're taking the total population as the published number, and we're comparing across all 3,143 counties. Now, one limitation is that, that's just one run of the data. We're not thinking of a world where we're not thinking of the metaverse here where we've got, 100 different runs or 1,000 different runs of the data, and we can see, okay, here's the worst case scenario, here's the average scenario, here's the best case scenario. This is just one run. But again, because of the way that the algorithm works, and because we have been able to produce so many demonstration data releases, we do argue that these metrics are a really good indicator of how accurate the data are overall. A bigger thing that we want to convey is that when we're looking at those metrics, when we look at those metrics, we will be looking at them in a second, some actual numbers. Those numbers include errors from swapping as well as errors from the top-down algorithm. There's not an easy way to separate those two out because we wanted to compare to the published 2010 numbers in order for the data users, general public, to be able to follow along with us. So they could see, okay, hey, you have, Ottawa County, this population is 1,001, but we have a different number. We wanted to compare to the published 2010 tabulations to allow for an easier comparison and so for folks to be able to follow along with us. But the downside to that is that we are capturing swapping error. We don't publish statistics on swapping error because that would be a disclosure risk. But for certain characteristics and at certain geographies, this ends up being a very large part of the error. We do internally have metrics comparing the unswapped data to the disclosure avoidance output, but we're not able to release those because, again, that might leak information about the swap rates and other ways that we publish the 2010 data. So we've been Hello? Can you hear me? Michael, I can see you moving.
I can hear you now. You
Okay.
dropped off for a second, but I think you've returned.
I'm sorry. My internet has been quite spotty today. I'm in the basement, so I blame the basement. Okay, so now we're onto this slide. So like I said, we've released now 9 versions of detailed summary metrics that show the evolution of the disclosure avoidance system. And this release really we get to see improvements that we've made between the final, the previous, the 8th demonstration data release, which was in August of 2022, and the final code settings for the production run in November 2022. So during those few months, we made significant improvements in accuracy for householder race, for presence and age of owned children, relationship to householder more generally, single year of age for children in counties and school districts, age for persons in group quarters, and same-sex married and unmarried partners in households containing those individuals. Next slide, please. So I'm going to present a few highlights from the detailed summary metrics. The numbers in black are from the prior data release, and the numbers in blue are from the most recent data release. The demonstration detail, the detailed demonstration. I'm sorry, I got flustered from this internet thing. I'm worried I'm going to go out again. So the numbers in blue are from the most recent release on April 3rd. So here you can see that we've got several different columns. One is a mean population, You can see that this is at the census tract up in the top here, top right of the tables, geography, census tract. The universe is occupied housing units. And on average, an average census tract has about 725 units, housing units that are owned with a mortgage. About 315 owned free and clear, i.e. without a mortgage, and about 528 that are renter occupied. Then I show 4 different columns of metrics that sort of describe the performance of the disclosure avoidance system. So first is that mean absolute error. So again, we take all 72,000 census tracts and we say, okay, what's the published count of owned with a mortgage units, and what was the count of owned with a mortgage units from this disclosure avoidance demonstration run. The black are the prior from August, the blue are the most recent, and we can see that they're the two. So we say, okay, each census tract has a difference, an absolute value difference, and we take the average across all 72,000 units. That's the mean absolute error. Another way to look at that is the 95th percentile of the absolute error. So we can say, okay, of all 72,000 census tracts, let's line them up from least amount of error, so 0. Many of them are, in fact, 0 error. They get the exact same number, whether they were, the published number or the number from the disclosure avoidance tabulation. And we line them up from least amount of error to most amount of error. And then we say, what's that 95th percentile case? So that means that 95th percentile case means that 95% of tracts will have a lower error than this number. And then we do the same thing for percent error and 95th percentile of absolute percent error. So let's go through each one of those in turn. We're going to spend a little bit more time on this slide, and then we can go more quickly through the remaining. So the first number we've got is 1.65 and then 2.04. So what does that mean? So on average, both of those round to about 2, which means that on average, the census tract has about 2 more or 2 fewer housing units that are owned with a mortgage after differential privacy plus swapping. So again, these metrics do include swapping error as well as the application of the new disclosure avoidance techniques. So it's not clear which one's which, but I can tell you that plus or minus 2 units out of a mean population of 725, that's not that bad. That's really, we are pretty satisfied with that result. And then when we move one column to the right, looking at the 95th percentile, 4 or 5, it means for 95% of tracts, that population of owned with a mortgage changes by 4 units, either up 4 units or down 4 units, or 5. And again, compared to a mean population, that's really not such a large amount. The final 2 columns are looking at percent. So the first one, 1%, means that for both the prior and this one, the average census tract had a percent difference of about 1%. So comparing, to the published 2010, it was off by about 1%. It's off by about 1% still. And the 95th percentile is again off by about 1%. Either way, whether you're before, the prior or now. So we've decided that these are acceptable errors, even for the 95th percentile cases, that these really do, that these 1% errors at the 95th percentile, missing by about 5 units out of a mean population of about 315, these are acceptable errors, even for the 95th percentile cases, whether you're looking at overall absolute error or absolute percent error, that these are acceptable in order to preserve privacy and confidentiality. Next slide, please. So now we're going to start looking at where the increased accuracy came from as a result of different queries, different allocations of privacy loss budget, and just a different way, different settings that we were able to increase accuracy for these particular populations. So one of those is the coupled household type. You can see that the mean absolute error decreased from 5.83 to 4.58 for opposite sex married couple households. For same-sex married couple households, it went from 3.62 down to 2.38. And similar numbers for unmarried partner households, 5.12 to 3.68 for opposite-sex unmarried partner households, and 3.61 to 2.29 for same-sex unmarried partner households. And you can see with the mean population differences that these are very different sized groups with you know, at the county level. The mean population for opposite-sex married couple household is nearly 18,000, but the same-sex married couple household is only about 111. So these mean absolute errors do kind of have different impacts on the overall size of the population. You know, you're not going to necessarily notice a 5% change when you're considering a base population of nearly 18,000. But you might notice it a little bit more for a population of 111. But our point is that we are still very, very close. You know, that 2.38, 2.29, that rounds to 2. So on average, we're within 2 households, either again, +2 or -2 of the published 2010 numbers for these characteristics. So we were very happy to see that improvement for this coupled household type. You can see similar improvements at the 95th percentile absolute error. You can see that even at the 95th percentile, the 95% of counties have a change of 6 or fewer for the same-sex married couple household and the same-sex unmarried partner household. That's about, they're off by about 6 or fewer for 95% of counties. So we were happy to see that. Now, the percent errors for these are going to be a little bit tricky because these do end up having very small base populations, and there are in fact many counties where that number of same-sex married couple households or same-sex unmarried partner households might be very close to 0. So, that's where percent changes get a little bit tricky because, a change from 1 household to 3 households looks like a 200% change, and that is a 200 in the average. That pulls the average way up. But overall, you're not going to start thinking that this county has a lot more households of that type if you go from 1 to 3. It looks like a big change in percent terms, but in overall absolute terms, it looks pretty small. And considering it, one of the things that we do is consider, sort of the overall rankings, like what's the most prevalent household type or second most prevalent household type in a particular county or in a particular tract. And those numbers don't really change, even with these somewhat larger percent errors. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned presence and age of own children. Here we're looking at presence of own children under the age of 6. And here, unlike the other slides, we've got multiple different geo levels represented as rows because this is a pretty simple table. So all of these different rows kind of come in here. Counties are the first row, incorporated places are the second, and then the 3 types of school districts are the bottom 3 rows. And for each, you can see significant improvements in the mean absolute errors, significant improvements in the 95th percentile absolute errors in the demonstration data product suite. So we're very happy to see those improvements there. That is going to give us a lot more accuracy. We heard from data users during our demonstration, during our outreach, that these statistics were used for school district planning and the like, so we wanted to make sure to increase accuracy there. Next slide, please. This is a slide that really communicates the tremendous amount of improvement for householder race. This is actually crossing race of householder by tenure, so tenure by household race of householder. But the point remains that you can really see just how much increased accuracy we're able to get for race of householder at various geographic levels. You can see that the owner-occupied line, the white alone, the mean population is about 20,000. That mean absolute error went from 83 or about 84 rounds to about 5.54. So that is a great improvement in the amount of error there. Other races of householders saw similar improvements. So for example, the next line is Black or African American alone, owner occupied. That went from 48 down to 4. Or looking at the 95th percentile absolute error, that went from 157 down to 12. So again, for 95% of counties, the average Black or African American alone owner-occupied household count changes by 12 or fewer. And for an overall population of about 2,000, that's pretty good for that. We're happy to see that reduction in error. Again, some of these 95th percentile absolute percent errors do look very large. Many of those are going to be very small base populations. There may be many counties where there's just very few Black or African American alone householders, owner-occupied or renter-occupied, and so that will tend to have a large percent. Likewise with other categories like Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone. There may be many counties where that number is 0 or 1 or 2 households with that race of householders. So that might mean a very large percent change, even though the overall change, the absolute change, is very small. So
Matt, can I ask? So there's
yes.
a surprising number of very even 200% and 100%. Can you speak to maybe why we're seeing such even numbers in some of those and what the underlying factor is?
Yes, so this is, so the 95th percentile, that's a great question. 95th percentile absolute percent error is, the way that we think about it is, this is at the county level. We take every county and we line them up from least amount of error. And so because this is percent error, that's 0% error, all the way up to the highest error. And it's possible so the way that we do percent calculations it's a little bit tricky, because we want to make sure that a 0 remaining a 0 counts as 0% change. Because if you look at the percent error calculation, right, if you say, how do I count the percent change from 0 to 0? Something going from 0 to 0, you can't actually calculate the percent error for that, because 0 minus 0 divided by 0 is not a number. So what we do is we use a special technique where if the published number is 0 and the disclosure avoidance protected number is 0, we count that as a 0% change. So that would go toward the most accurate numbers. If the published number is some positive number, so let's say it's 2, and then the disclosure avoidance number is 0, we say, okay, that's 2 minus 0, that's 2, divided by 2. And so we say that's 100% change. You go from 2 down to 0, that's 100% change. You lose 100%. It's 100% change. And then so that's the largest you can go down. And then if the published number is 0, but the disclosure avoidance number is some positive number like 1 or 2 or 4, well, we also have trouble calculating that as well. But what we do is we say, okay, we're going to set those we basically set them to 200 is the long and short of it. We say, okay, if you go from 0 to 4 or 0 to 2, we call that a 200% change. The details are available in our metrics overview document, but we had to make some decision about how to treat those cases. And we took the idea from our chief scientist emeritus, John Aboud, to essentially call them 200% change. So that's why you'll see 200% change, because there ends up being a decent number of these counties where there were 0 and now there's 1, or now there are 2 households, and those end up getting tagged as 200%. And so you have a lot of 200% sort of on the less accurate end of things. And then when you're taking the 95th percentile, you chop it right at the 95th percentile, and that can be 200%. So that's why you end up seeing a lot of those 200s. It's really the best thing to do is not necessarily look at the percent error in isolation. The best thing to do is to really look across the entire board. You see, like, for example, Asian alone has a 200% error for the 95th percentile APE, absolute percent error. But then if you look over at the actual mean absolute error and the 95th percentile absolute error, or 95th AE, it's 2.96, which is about 3, and 9. So 3, household change or 9 household change. That I think is a little bit more interpretable. That sort of makes a little bit more sense about how much error there is. And again, this is error both due to swapping and due to the top-down algorithm. Especially when you're comparing to a base population of about 856. So that's sort of where I look at it. Try to look at the entire row as you're assessing fitness for use, and we are happy to see improvements there. We're happy to see much better mean absolute errors for those populations. I hope that answered your question. If anyone else has questions, please do put them in the Q&A on the side of your screen here, and then one of us can try to answer them. Okay, next slide, please. And this is, I think, is my final slide. This is just showing that we've heard from many stakeholders and data users that single year of age is extremely important for things like school district planning and other cases, even at the county level. So we've did a lot to increase privacy loss budget for those particular cases, and without sacrificing confidentiality, without sacrificing privacy, and we were able to achieve a substantial reduction in the amount of noise, a substantial increase in the amount of accuracy. You can see that on average, these mean populations at the county level, they're all about 1,200 or so, 1,300 on average is the population. Now the mean absolute error went from about 15 or so, and now you can see they're about 5 or 6. So that's a substantial improvement in the average accuracy. And the 95th percentile absolute error, you can see that went from in the 40s or 50s down to in the the 15 and 14 or so. Likewise, there are improvements in the percent errors as well. So we're happy to see that increase in accuracy for single years of age. This is just showing 0 to 15, but includes up to 18 as well. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn this back to Michael to discuss how the application of the top-down algorithm has allowed us to increase confidentiality protections, and he's going to present some results for that. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you, Matt. So we saw at the beginning of the webinar some rather alarming re-identification statistics from our simulated attack on the 2010 published tables. So how well do the production settings that we're using for the 2020 DHC, how well do they protect against these types of re-identification attacks? So to do that, we essentially took the demonstration data and ran them through the exact same simulated attack that we did on the original 2010 published tables. And what we found was, here you can see the top line in each section is those original results that I showed at the beginning of the webinar. And then the second line is kind of a comparison that we had to an alternate version of disclosure avoidance where it was just a significantly enhanced swapping algorithm. And then the bottom two in red are essentially a simulated reconstruction embedded re-identification attack from the 2010 DDPS tables, or a direct re-identification attack using the 2010 DDPS microdata, the privacy protected microdata file, again, to the commercial data or to the Ceph. And what you'll see is particularly on precision, and I should clarify, this is for those population uniques of the non-modal race that I said were so particularly alarming in the original attack. What you'll see is, like, particularly for precision, the rates are substantially reduced. So not only are, like in the putative race, not only would an attacker be making fewer matches in the attack from 24% on exact age or 13% on exact and bind down to 12 and 6, or 90 and 86 down to 38 or 28. So they're making fewer matches overall, but especially their confidence or their potential confidence in the accuracy of those matches is substantially reduced. So from like 89.2% down to 21%, or sorry, 22%, from 81.5% down to 23%. So we're seeing substantially reduced precision, substantially reduced rates overall. So as you can see, at the production settings that we're going to be using for the 2020 DHC, which is coming out next month, we're getting substantially greater protection than we had from the swapping algorithm in 2010. So in our few remaining minutes, and again, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. We're trying to answer those as we can. I wanted to alert you to some upcoming resources, some resources that already exist and some upcoming ones. We have 3 great disclosure avoidance briefs that we've put together in partnership with the Population Reference Bureau. We've got disclosure avoidance in the 2010 redistricting data, why the Census Bureau chose differential privacy, which gives a nice kind of explanation for why the changes and what the changes mean. And then a kind of a deeper dive into how the top-down algorithm works and what some implications for data users are. So those were just released a couple weeks ago. They're great briefs. We're really excited about having gotten those out. We have a bunch of additional guidance and documentation available on our webpage at this link here. Again, the slides will be available after the webinar. And we have many more resources in development, as well as some additional specific guidance and training for how to use the 2020 census data given kind of the known impact of the 2020 census disclosure avoidance system on the data. So definitely stay tuned for those. Coming soon, again, kind of picking up on that, we're going to be releasing in conjunction with next week's Population Association of America conference, we're going to be releasing guidance and examples on how to use the noisy measurement files for those who are interested to calculate unbiased estimates and confidence intervals for statistics of interest in the data. If you want to be able to kind of follow the release of those and hear when those are released, you can subscribe to our newsletter to receive the announcement. And Matthew and I are going to be giving a webinar on that topic at some point in the next several weeks. We don't have a date for that, but if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll hear the announcement for it. And then looking ahead, here's kind of the suite of 2020 census data products and their anticipated release dates. We've got the demographic profile and the DHC being released on May 25th. We'll have the congressional district summary files being released in August. We have the detailed DHCA that's planned for a September 2023 release, and then release dates to be determined for the detailed DHCB and supplemental DHC. We also have, we announced just recently that we will be releasing public use microdata for the 2020 census. That will be the 2020 PPMF, the privacy protected microdata file. So 100% file in lieu of the 10% sample that was used in the past. And then future info on special tabulations as well. You can learn more. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Michael, can I interrupt? Can we just clarify, May 25th of this year? I don't know why it says 2025. That must have been a typo.
That was a typo. Excuse me for that.
It was 2023 in the earlier version. I don't know what happened. I'm very sorry about that, everybody. But yes, it is 2023. It is, in about a month and a half.
I apologize for that typo. That should have said 2023. So please forgive me for that. But yeah, so if you want to learn more about these data products, you can click on the link here in the slides that will be available. And with that, let's turn to the Q&A window and see what other questions we have. So we have a question from Greg. When will we receive the metro population by sex and age groups? Matt, can you speak to that? Is that part of the DHC?
So the sex and age group will be released by in the DHC by May 25th of this year, as we mentioned, and metropolitan areas are determined in a separate process, but those are collections of counties, as you know, that are determined sort of in a separate process. I believe the metropolitan area definitions have been recently updated so that those will be included. If they are updated, in the future, you can always combine various counties into a particular metropolitan area. For example, if a new county joins a metro area, you can bring that county in because those follow county boundaries very nicely. But I do believe that those will be part of the upcoming DHC release. Certainly, sex by age population will be data will be in the DHC. Thanks, Greg.
All right, and I'm not seeing any additional questions. I'll give folks another minute or two to put some in. Just a quick reminder, as I mentioned before, There will be a quick 4-question survey when you log off of the webinar. Please take a moment to fill that out so that we can improve future webinars for you. If you have questions that you don't get to ask today, please send them in to our 2020 DAS, 2020 DAS mailbox, 2020 DAS at census.gov, and we're happy to respond to those there. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. So with that, I will conclude this webinar. Thank you all very much for joining us, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.